Thank you, Ovid, and we are so excited actually to be welcoming Ovid to Washington, D.C. from New Hampshire, and so I hope you all will take a minute to get to know him as well, because he will be spending a lot of time on Capitol Hill and helping us to work with you all as we are wanting to be of service to you in helping to craft legislation. So I really want to recognize Senator Mike Lee, who has helped us put this briefing together and who has co-sponsored the event. And when they arrive, I'm also going to want to welcome Congressman Fleming and Congresswoman Blackburn, who have been so gracious in agreeing to speak. And then Dr. Calhoun will be speaking a little bit later, who is a professor and vice chair at the University of West Virginia at Charleston. And I'd also like to recognize Angela Lanfranchi. Thank you so much for coming. She's also an expert in this field. So we might put you on the spot a little bit later. So the question that I'd like to begin with this morning, or this afternoon, is should abortion come with a warning label? Should abortion come with a warning label? We put a warning label on a lot of products, and we mandate that because of the health risks associated with them. And we are going to argue to you today that there are such significant health risks to abortion that women are unaware of, and they need to be they deserve to have informed consent in knowing about that. Particularly, we stand here today in the wake of the conviction of Kermit Gosnell for several counts of infanticide, and also I would remind us all today that he also was instrumental in the death of a woman, Karnamaya Mongar, who came to his clinic after having survived 20 years in a refugee camp, and coming to America, met such horrific conditions in his in his clinic that she lost her life. So today we are launching here with you all Americans United for Life's Women's Protection Project, because women deserve protection from the harms of abortion. And my purpose in setting out a framework for the briefing is to help you focus on the fact that there are two prongs to this project. One that we are going to heavily emphasize today is abortion's harm to women, and this is why we're so glad to have Dr. Calhoun here. He's going to walk you through the well-documented, very well-documented harms that abortion poses to women's health. But as I'm setting this out, because you all work here on the Hill and your job is to be involved in drafting legislation, I want you to be able to understand how the Women's Protection Project fits into a legal strategy that targets Roe. Americans United for Life is the legal architect of the pro-life movement, and so our expertise is in looking at the constitutional strategy of how we defend life and law. And part of that defense involves knowing how we can best target the legal underpinnings of Roe. And so the Women's Protection Project does two things. While it is protecting women's health, it is also actually has a legal structure to it, and I'm going to walk you through that in a minute. Now, let's put a personal and a human face on this question of whether abortion deserves a warning label. Earlier this week, I ran across an article online by a young woman named Alexis Singer. I don't know if any of you all saw this, but it was I tweeted it out. If you'd like to see the link, I hope you'll come follow me on Twitter, and you can find it there. But it was entitled, "What It's Really Like to Have an Abortion." And so she talked about the process that she went through of discovering that she was pregnant and then making the abortion decision and how that affected her. And she said, no amount of sex education prepares you for that trapped feeling, Taking the test is like preparing for a funeral. And that she walks you very vividly what that felt like to her as she saw two lines on the test and not one. And I have to tell you, even though I've had 5 children myself, I never really quite thought until I heard her describe that the really ironic symbolism of the pregnancy test having 2 lines instead of one. And then she says very poignantly, no one tells you how it will feel, and she means the abortion. No one tells you how it will feel, how the waiting feels, the endless time. No one tells you that you will lie there totally open, totally lost, and that it will hurt. She goes on to describe that in a very moving way. And then she concludes at the end of it by saying, nothing goes back to normal. Nothing goes back to normal afterward. And what I really want us to focus on as a context for this briefing is this poignant statement by her that really speaks to me, because my professional job is to get up every morning and find the motivation to work on the abortion issue. And she says, no one tells you how it feels. Not only do they not tell you how it feels, though, they don't tell you what the effects are going to be on each woman. There isn't truth in advertising as it relates to abortion today. Today we're in the immediate aftermath of convicting Kermit Gosnell for the death of Karnamaya Mongar, but there are other women. Just in the last 6 months we've seen the death of Tanya Reeves in a Planned Parenthood in Chicago this past August. And Jennifer Morbelli died just a couple months ago right down the road in Maryland in Carhart's clinic. And as you all know, Dr. Carhart is one of the celebrated doctors of the abortion movement. So the truth of the matter is, Kermit Gosnell is not an aberration. He's not an aberration. These effects on women are coming all across the abortion industry, and not just in Kermit Gosnell's House of Horrors. So abortion advocates frequently like to posit us in the pro-life movement as waging a war on women, and that we're just about being pro-baby. But this is really a false framework. The truth is, we want to be advancing legislation that pays attention to both the baby and the mother, because this is where the American people need to be educated. So how does this affect you? Let's bring this down to asking the so what question. Why should you care, and what should you do about it? In your role of being involved in legislation, what we want to help you and enable you through today is to see that in your legislative findings, as you advance the life issue on Capitol Hill, we need to be educating the public and educating the legislature and educating the courts, specifically the courts, on how abortion harms women. So let's look a little bit at the legal landscape. Starting with Planned Parenthood v. Casey in 1992. That case was a real touchstone for where we stand today in terms of the legal landscape. In that case, Justice Kennedy, and you all know how significant his vote is on the court in terms of this issue, Justice Kennedy sketched out something that has come to be known in the legal arena as the reliance interest. He was answering the question of why do we need to maintain the right to abortion, and the answer that he gave is that American women have come to rely on abortion for their status in society. He wrote, "The ability of women to participate equally in the economic and social life of the nation has been facilitated by abortion." So boiling that all down, basically what Justice Kennedy is expressing is the sense of the court that women really need abortion, and that it empowers them in a certain way, that women are not able to compete equally with men in our culture unless they have abortion. I want you, within this framework, to start listening to the abortion debate with different ears, because you will hear the other side consistently using this messaging of empowerment every single time they talk about abortion. I don't have to remind you that they don't talk about abortion. We're going to talk about abortion a whole lot more here today than they ever. If we had a similar briefing from allies of big abortion, the word that you would hear from them is empowerment. That's the word that you would hear from them. And that is not just a slogan. It's actually rooted in our constitutional law today. So fast forward from 1992 to Gonzales v. Carhart in 2007, which was the partial birth abortion case. And what most people focus on with Gonzales v. Carhart was the specific outcome of that case, which was an upholding of the ban on partial birth abortion. So that was the specific legislative outcome of that case. But in terms of legal strategy, it's really important to underscore that Justice Kennedy, again, please note that it's Justice Kennedy again, because what he wrote in this case represents kind of an evolution of his thinking, and it highlights and gives us a lot of information about what he was thinking. What he wrote was that a state has a legitimate interest in protecting maternal health. The state has a legitimate interest in protecting maternal health. So what we need to understand very fully as we are looking at crafting legislative findings is that the court has not left us in the dark about what the path forward is in terms of making an argument in front of them that they are receptive to. They are receptive to the argument that the state can regulate abortion as it relates to women's health and to maternal health specifically. So under the Gonzalez ruling, technically, it's the legislature's role to evaluate the medical evidence and determine the best way to protect women in light of that evidence. So I hope that helps you to see the context of why Dr. Calhoun's role today is so essential. He's here to help us in working with the legislature because the court has told us that that's the path forward in terms of addressing the abortion issue. So very importantly, there's two key points that you want to address as you're looking at a particular piece of pro-life legislation. It needs to have two prongs to it. It needs to address the unborn, obviously. Please don't ever misunderstand, because sometimes some people do. But I think as a pro-life movement, we've done a good job of addressing the unborn in different pieces of model legislation, and there's an excellent piece of model legislation, the unborn, the pain-capable bill that's going forward in the House that we are very supportive of. But this other pillar that Americans United for Life has been working on, in particular I'd like to recognize Clark Forsyth, our senior counsel, who is here today, who's been very instrumental in crafting this legislative language. There's another pillar that needs to be involved in abortion bans, and this is this question of maternal health. So Americans United for Life has a model specifically called the Women's Health Protection Act, and we're very proud that this particular legislation passed in Arizona last year. And as an illustration for you of how significant that legislation is, the Center for Reproductive Rights filed to enjoin the legislation immediately after its passage. And it has worked its way through the courts until just this last month, the Ninth Circuit came back and ruled against the law. And we are fully expecting it, however, to be appealed to the Supreme Court, which is precisely what you want to see happen. So what is it that's particularly significant about that particular piece of legislation? Because it has a particular pillar of legislative findings that detail the fact that after 20 weeks, the harm to women, particularly as it relates to maternal mortality, escalates like a hockey stick on a chart. The risk to women's mortality with abortion, in late-term abortion in particular, and we define late-term abortion as after 20 weeks. See, people like to think of late-term abortion as being, that partial birth abortion right before birth, but in actual fact, the risks to women really dramatically increase at and after 20 weeks. And so the Women's Health Protection Act, which we have with us here today, specifically details the after 20-week threats to women's health. And so in just a minute, Dr. Calhoun is going to join us, and he's going to go very carefully over those findings. I do want to set up Dr. Calhoun's findings because he's going to go over the fact that abortion's harm to women includes low birth weight of children born subsequent to a woman's initial abortion, maternal mortality, which I've already referenced, and can I just say, in terms of my heart on this issue, it is really, really tragic to me that women continue to die in this country from abortion and that no one pays attention. That the media just completely acts as if those deaths are to be expected as a normal part of business with the abortion right. And I believe we have to push back against that with every fiber of our being. There's also a very, very significant risk of depression, and this is not just being sad. This is actual clinical depression, and with an increase of suicidal ideation related to it. And with deference to Angela and her expertise on this issue, there's also an association between abortion and a risk of breast cancer. And as a breast cancer survivor, that's also very important to me. So I'm going to go ahead and conclude, because I do want to be sure and give Congressman Fleming lots of time, and we will have time for questions after Dr. Calhoun's presentation.